Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and today we are back with our last GPU review of the month, and I'll look at the final of the three RTX 40 series Super refresh cards. I'm of course talking about the RTX 4080 Super, which on paper definitely looks like the least interesting of the three, offering only a minor increase in core count and just a very small bump to both the memory and the GPU clock speeds. It does, however, come in with a new lower price point of £959 here in the UK or $999 over in the US. So today we're going to put it through its paces and find out whether or not this GPU is worth buying. Announced back at CES 2024 alongside the 4070 Super and the 4070 Ti Super, the new RTX 4080 Super is a very easy graphics card to summarise, as it's using the same AD103 die as the original RTX 4080, but this time it's fully populated. That means 4 extra SMs for a total of 10,240 CUDA cores, or just 5% more than the RTX 4080. Tensor cores, texture units and RT cores all see small increases as well, though ROP count remains at 112. GPU clock speed has been tweaked very slightly up to 2550 MHz, as has memory speed from 22.4 gigabits per second to 23 gigabits per second on the new 4080 Super. Over the same 256-bit memory bus, that gives total memory bandwidth of 736 gigabytes a second. Lastly, TGP is also unchanged at 320 watts. Based on those specs then, the RTX 4080 Super certainly doesn't look that interesting on paper, but there is no doubt the new price point is the main event here. As a quick refresher, in November 2022, the RTX 4080 actually launched at £1,269 here in the UK, whereas fast forward to today and the 4080 Super is launching for £959. Of course, we do still need to test this card and find out what it brings to the table, so for this we used our regular GPU test system provided to us by PC Specialist. This is based on Intel's i9-3900KS CPU, paired with the Gigabyte Z790 Gaming AX motherboard, and we've also got 32 gigs of Corsair Dominator Platinum DDR5 memory. All of the benchmark data you're going to see in this video is the same as from our 4070 Super and 4070 Ti Super reviews, which was all collected from fresh at the start of the month using the latest drivers. We're going to focus on 4K data in this review, but I did also test 1080p and 1440p, so if you do want to see that and every single one of our benchmark charts, you can head over to the written review on kitguru.net, and there'll also be a link down in the description below. Our first game of the day then is Alan Wake 2, where at 4K, the 4080 Super delivers 44 FPS, but as you can see, that makes it functionally level with the original 4080. Yes, technically there is a 1.4% difference, but the end result is identical. The 4080 Super is also on par with the 7900 XTX here, though it does have better 1% lows. Assassin's Creed Mirage then is next, and this actually shows us the biggest difference between the 4080 Super and the original 4080 that we will see all day. With the new GPU hitting 82 FPS, that makes it 5% faster than the model it replaces. 4080 Super is also barely slower than the 7900 XTX, and it's about 15% faster than the 4070 Ti Super. Up next though, we have Cyberpunk 2077, where the 4080 Super once again has an almost non-existent performance differential against the regular RTX 4080, as both cards are within 1.3% of each other at 4K, while the new card is also lagging behind AMD's 7900 XTX by a 10% margin. Forza Horizon 5, it's another game where we see very underwhelming results from the 4080 Super, as it's not even a single frame faster than the 4080 at 4K. It also comes in 8% slower than the 7900 XTX and about 17% faster than the 4070 Ti Super. As for The Last of Us Part 1, here we can see the 4080 Super hits 63 FPS compared to 62 FPS for the regular 4080, so it's not exactly a big step forward. The 7900 XTX is still faster than both GPUs here by a handful of frames, while the 4090 of course remains a class apart. It's more of the same in A Plague Tale Requiem, with close enough to identical performance on offer when looking at the 4080 and the 4080 Super. The difference between the two cards really is absolutely meaningless in this game. As for Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart then, we're again looking at a difference of just a single frame between these two 80 series SKUs, which really is margin of error stuff. Versus the 4070 Ti Super, you do get about 18% more performance from the fully enabled AD103 GPU. New game then, and same result, as the 4080 Super is within 1% of the original 4080 in Red Dead Redemption 2, so there's just no difference in performance. It also lags quite a bit behind the 7900 XTX here by a 14% margin at 4K. Moving on to Resident Evil 4 then, and here we actually see one of the bigger differences between the two cards, with the 4080 Super being 2.5% faster, but that works out as just 2 FPS in the real world, so there's just no way you'd be able to tell the difference. Likewise, in Returnal, both models deliver 73 FPS on average, so there's just no change at all. The 4080 Super is also 5% slower than the 7900 XTX, while it comes in 18% faster than the 4070 Ti Super. Once more, we see basically non-existent performance differences between the 4080 and 4080 Super when looking at Starfield. Both cards come in 9% slower than the 7900 XTX, or 27% behind the RTX 4090. Our final test then for rasterized performance is Total War Pharaoh, which sees the 4080 Super hit 74 FPS, so it's a single frame faster than the 4080. It does at least come in faster than the 7900 XTX here by a 7% margin at 4K. Overall then, across the 12 games tested, it is safe to say performance versus the RTX 4080 is incredibly underwhelming. The price cut is clearly the main event here, but at 4K, we're looking at an average difference that's just 1% in favour of the 4080 Super. That means this new GPU is still slower than the 7900 XTX by a 6% margin, while it's 11% faster than the 7900 XT and 18% faster than the 4070 Ti Super. Anyone hoping for anything close to RTX 4090 performance as well will be disappointed, as the 4080 Super is 24% slower on average at 4K. Just to quickly illustrate the performance differences against the RTX 4080 then, here we can see a breakdown of all 12 games tested at 4K, showing the relative performance increase of the 4080 Super. Just 3 games show a difference of more than 2%, and only one shows a margin above 3%, so these really are margin of error differences. I did communicate that general sentiment to Nvidia during this review process, and also sent them a few of my benchmark logs just so they could check nothing was wrong with the sample I was sent. Nvidia did not dispute my data at all, but one thing they did say was that my RTX 4080 non-Super Founders Edition did appear to be a good model, as it was actually boosting to a higher clock speed than what Nvidia themselves saw from their own 4080 testing. This chart you can see here then shows the average clock speed of the 4080 and 4080 Super across all 12 games I tested, and we can see a small frequency advantage for the 4080 non-Super, as it was clocking roughly 60 MHz faster at any given resolution. That's just a 2% difference on average though, and we do have to ask if something so insignificant can really change the picture that much. Clearly, there is just a very minimal difference between the performance of the 4080 and the 4080 Super. In fact, I also got to test a couple of AIBs for this review and found that the Palit 4080 Super JetStream OC would typically run about 100 to 120 MHz slower than my 4080 Super Founders Edition. That meant it was actually coming in 1 to 2% behind the RTX 4080 non-Super, or by 1 or 2 FPS. But even then, the fact that a higher clocked 4080 can be a slightly slower clocked 4080 Super really does tell you everything you need to know about these GPUs. I did also test the Gigabyte Gaming OC, and that one is actually 1 to 2% faster than the 4080 Super Founders Edition, as it clocked about 60 MHz higher in the real world, but we will focus a little more on those cards later on in the video. Back to the 4080 Super though, and a look at cost per frame. Considering that the 4080 Super performs the same as the 4080, but with a UK MSRP that's £310 lower at launch, overall value is improved by a fair bit, as cost per frame comes in 26% lower with the new model. That makes it basically on par with the RTX 4070 using its original launch MSRP, though it's still hardly an improvement over the RTX 3080 10GB, which launched at £649 at the end of 2020. Cost per frame using current retail prices also tell a different story. RTX 4080 may have launched at £1,269 over a year ago, but it's been selling under £1,100 in recent months, making the 4080 Super 13% better value. It is still an improvement, but it's not nearly as large as the MSRP data would suggest. The RX 7900 XTX also continues to offer superior value for rasterization, as the 4080 Super is 17% more expensive per frame. Moving on to ray tracing performance though, we're going to start with Alan Wake 2, which at 4K with path tracing enabled is incredibly demanding, even using FSR quality upscaling. Admittedly, Nvidia performance is in a completely different league to AMD GPUs here, but we're still looking at basically identical performance between the 4080 and the 4080 Super. Next we have Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, and this one sees a 10% lead for the 4080 Super over the 7900 XTX at 4K, though it's no faster than the original 4080, so quickly moving on to Cyberpunk 2077, and once again, performance of the 4080 Super is no better than the vanilla RTX 4080. That does, however, still make it about 46% faster than AMD's 7900 XTX, which goes to show just how much better Nvidia GPUs are for ray tracing in this title. F123 shows another decent lead for the 4080 Super over the 7900 XTX, this time by a 17% margin, but is the 4080 Super any faster than the 4080? No, it is not. Hitman 3 is up next then, and it's more of the same here. We're talking performance that's within 1 FPS of the original 4080, while we do still see a healthy lead over the RX 7900 XTX. Ratchet and Clank shows us an even bigger lead for Nvidia over AMD with ray tracing enabled, as the 4080 Super is almost twice as fast as the 7900 XTX, though once again it does not offer a tangible benefit over the RTX 4080. AMD is more competitive in the Unreal Engine 4 based Returnal, but the 4080 Super still holds a 16% lead over AMD's flagship, while it's barely 1% faster than the original 4080. Lastly then, we close up with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and once again we're looking at a difference of just a single frame comparing the 4080 Super to the 4080. The new Nvidia GPU is still 21% faster than AMD's RX 7900 XTX. Looking at the 8-game ray tracing average then, it's no surprise to see the RTX 4080 Super is second only to the RTX 4090, though it is admittedly still well behind the Nvidia flagship. It also has a clear beating of AMD's flagship RX 7900 XTX by a 30% margin over the 8 games tested, but again, there are just no real gains over the original RTX 4080. Enough of those very boring benchmarks though, and it's time to move on to take a look at the 3 different RTX 4080 Super cards that I was sent for today's video, and we're going to kick off with the Nvidia Founders Edition. Just like the RTX 4070 Super that we looked at a couple of weeks ago, this one features a stealthy matte black design, which I have to say I absolutely love. The cooler itself is exactly the same, it's really just the new colorway, so we still get the same 2 120mm fans, one on either side, while the GeForce RTX logo does illuminate with white LEDs. In terms of the size as well, it's still a very big card, measuring 304 by 127 by 60mm, and it weighed in at over 2.1 kilos. Of course, it is still powered by a single 12-watt high-power connector, though a triple 8-pin adapter does come in the box. Display outputs are also unchanged, with 3 DisplayPort 1.4 and 1 HDMI 2.1. I also got the Gigabyte Gaming OC model as well, another matte black design which appears to be more or less identical to the regular 4080 Gaming OC. It does use a quite plasticky shroud, which is a bit of a shame at the price point, but we do get three 110mm fans, plus there is a bit of an RGB light show once the card is powered on. We also find a grey metal backplate as well as a dual BIOS switch, which we do test out later in the video. No denying it, this is a monster card measuring 343 by 150 by 75mm, so it's almost 4 slots thick and it weighed in at 1.73 kilos. Power is once again delivered by a 12V high power connector with another triple 8-pin adapter in the box, and we also get 3 DisplayPort and 1 HDMI 2.1 video outputs. Finally then, I also got the Palit JetStream OC model, which is actually an MSRP card. It's very similar to the 4070 Super JetStream OC that I reviewed recently, with an all black design using a very plasticky shroud, but it does at least have a metal backplate. There's no RGB or dual BIOS on this card, but we do find 3 fans, each measuring approximately 95mm. It's still a big card as well, measuring in at 328.9 by 130.5 by 63.5mm, though it is actually a bit lighter at just under 1.5 kilos. Interestingly, it only ships with a dual 8-pin adapter in the box, but we do get the same allocation of video outputs. Starting off with thermal performance of these cards then, all 3 are grouped fairly close together, with the Gaming OC's OC BIOS delivering the lowest temperatures, while the JetStream OC came in at the top, though there's not even a 5-degree gap between those 2 cards. We do however see a bigger difference when looking at memory thermals, where the Founders Edition does run the hottest of the 3 cards we've tested today, though the peak of 72 degrees is still well within safe limits. The Gaming OC however is the runaway leader here, with a best result of just 56 degrees when using the OC BIOS. In terms of noise levels as well, the 4080 Super Founders Edition and the Gigabyte Gaming OC using the OC BIOS both produced 39 decibels of noise, so they're not whisper quiet, but they're not super loud either. The Gaming OC's silent BIOS and the Palit JetStream OC, however, were noticeably quieter, producing just 36 decibels of noise, and I'm also happy to say that none of the 3 cards had any issues with coil whine during my testing. After normalizing noise to 40 decibels on all 3 cards and then rerunning our thermal stress tests, we can again see very similar results between all 3 of the RTX 4080 Supers. The Founders Edition is nominally the worst performing, but the differences are barely 2 degrees between itself and the Gigabyte Gaming OC, so this metric isn't super important when determining which of these 3 cards to buy. In terms of noise normalized memory temperatures though, the Founders Edition is still running the hottest, peaking at 70 degrees, which makes it 14 degrees warmer than the Gigabyte Gaming OC, or 4 degrees hotter than the Palit JetStream OC. Moving on to power draw then, as a reminder, we use Nvidia's PCAT tool to measure power draw of the graphics card only, which I measure over all 12 games tested at 1080p, 1440p and 4K, which enables a very high degree of accuracy. If you do want to see results on a per game basis, you can find those over in the written article on kitguru.net, but in this video, just to save us some time, I'm only going to be focusing on the 12 game average results at 4K. In terms of the average power draw then at 4K, the RTX 4080 Super drew 287.1 watts under load, and that is still almost 40 watts below the rated 320 TGP. We see no significant difference in power draw compared to the RTX 4080, but the 4080 Super is still drawing a good chunk less power than the RX 7900 XTX, while it's also drawing about 100 watts less than the RTX 4090. Such similar power draw and performance levels means the 4080 Super and the 4080 are just as efficient as each other, sitting joint top of our average results. That means Nvidia still has a clear lead over RDNA 3, with the 4080 Super offering 18% better performance per watt than AMD's flagship 7900 XTX, and it's even a hair more efficient than the RTX 4090. The final area I want to look at then is overclocking, and I'm not going to go into every single detail of all 3 cards tested, as I did actually produce standalone reviews for each of the 3 cards if you're interested. But as a quick high-level summary, the Gigabyte Gaming OC did overclock the best, likely due to it featuring the highest power limit, while the Palit JetStream OC didn't see much improvement at all, and it also couldn't increase the power limit beyond 100%. Gains were still very typical of the Ada architecture, however, in the 3 to 8% region depending on the game, so you might consider it to be worth doing, but in reality it's not going to make that much difference. So that is really it for our review of the RTX 4080 Super, and it really is a very easy graphics card to summarise, as it's no real amount faster than the original 4080, so whether or not it will appeal to you purely comes down to the new lower price point. As boring as it is, we do still have to make it clear that this is a very fast graphics card. It's great for 4K gaming and second only to the RTX 4090 in terms of ray tracing. I just find it incredibly dull that we haven't seen any real improvement over the original 4080, but if you do pick one up, we can't deny the performance is mighty impressive. 4080 Super is all about the new lower price point, however, hitting the market at £959, which makes it about £150 to £200 cheaper than what the RTX 4080 has been retailing at over the last few months, and we can't deny that is a good thing. That said, it is still a very expensive graphics card, and it's really not like the 4080 Super has suddenly become a killer value even with that price cut. Based on our cost per frame data, for instance, it's barely offering better value than the 3-year-old RTX 3080 10GB, being 53% faster but 48% more expensive. AMD's RX 7900 XTX is also now available for under £900, and that could well be an option if you're not interested in ray tracing, as it's 6% faster on average for rasterization at 4K. At the end of the day then, if you were already set to drop £1,200 on the original RTX 4080, then sure, the 4080 Super has saved you a couple £100, and it is better value at the new lower price point. I personally, however, just can't escape the feeling that this launch is incredibly pointless, as a price cut to the original 4080 would achieve the exact same thing. I can only think that Nvidia is trying to eke out every drop of the last remaining interest in the RTX 40 series from this cycle before we move on to the RTX 50 series, which I guess is fine, but if this is the last RTX 40 series GPU that we do, it's a very dull way to go out. Anyway guys, that is really going to do it for this video. If you liked it, please do toss me a thumbs up, and as always, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Please do subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure to ding that notification bell so you don't miss when we upload a new video. If you want to come carry on the conversation with us in our Discord server, you can find a link to that down in the description, where you can also find a link to our merch store where you can pick up a cool t-shirt like the ones on screen now. Lastly, if you are feeling particularly generous, you can even consider backing us on Patreon. That's it for this one though guys, I'm Dominic for Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.